This is the Casambi Xpress switch. It has 4 configurable buttons. They can be configured to control a single luminaire, a group, a scene, an element, or other automation options which we'll talk about later on. There is a plus and minus button which are used for fading luminaires up and down. Holding down the button will fade up. Holding down the minus will fade down. A single quick press of either the plus or the minus will jump to 0% or 100% respectively. 100% on the plus. The 2 remaining buttons are the up and down. They are primarily used for tunable white for changing the colour temperature, but depending on the fixture which is used with the Casambi app, it can also be used for indirect and direct lighting. So in other words, for adjusting the difference between uplighting and downlighting. We're now going to add the Xpress to the network. If we go to nearby devices, we'll see that it's not currently in the list. The reason for that is because the device itself, the switch itself, is still asleep. We need to first wake it up. To do that, we're going to press any 2 buttons at the same time. You'll now see that all 4 corner lights are now lit up. That means it's in pairing mode. So if we go back to nearby devices, it's there at the top of the list. It's currently very old, so we'll first update the firmware. Update has succeeded, and you can see that the lights are still on, so we can quickly add it to our Casambi network. And as you can see in the top right hand corner, it's now updated to the firmware version 26, and it's now joined the Casambi network. So if we now go to more switches, we can now see the various options that are available for this switch. Here you have the 4 presets. The different options for each preset either are to control a scene, control a group, control a luminaire directly, or control all luminaires. You have the toggle option. What that means is it's now currently turned on. If we assign something to preset number 1, I would then press once to turn it on and again to turn it off. If we disable toggle, I would press number 1 to turn on the scene. However, pressing it again would not do anything. It would just continue to turn the scene on. In this case, to turn the scene off, I would have to first select scene number 1 and then press the minus button. If I turn the toggle back on, I could turn the scene on and then press it again to turn the scene off. Turning the toggle back off, the advantage of this can be, in the case of an RGB light, you could assign a green scene here, a red scene here, a blue scene here, and maybe an orange scene here. It would then be pretty annoying to then have to go colour 1, colour number 2, off, number 3. To turn everything on and off would be annoying. So if you leave toggle turned off, you can then simply fade between the different coloured scenes. However, in most cases, you probably will want to use the toggle in order to use the same button to turn a scene on and off. The second option has its advantages, but also has huge disadvantages. It says long press all off. What that means is, if I hold down this button, regardless of the scene that is assigned to it, it will then turn off all luminaires, all devices within your entire network. This is on by default. I recommend you turn it off. There are advantages to this option though, however. If this switch was to be installed in a master bedroom, it would mean the people in the house who went to bed, they could use one single press of the button to turn off all lights in their house before they went to bed. However, if the same option, long press all off, was used in the kitchen, if somebody was to hold down the scene button a little too long, it would turn off all lights in the house. So use that option cautiously. It has its advantages and its disadvantages. As with any, you can change the name of the device, you can set a photograph for it or a new icon, and things like that. Again, as you can see now, it's showing offline, and that's because the unit has now gone back to sleep. None of its lights are turned on. And just to quickly show you again, so you control a scene, choose a scene, done, and now the scene has been assigned to that preset. These are examples of an EnOcean switch. The EnOcean switch itself is actually the same device with inside all of these three cases. It's actually 4 push buttons, regardless of which fascia you use. However, the amount of different rockers you can see dictate how the switch itself should be used. Here we have a single rocker with an up and a down. Here we have a dual rocker, double rocker, both with an up and a down. And here we have 4 separate push buttons. Here we have an example of an EnOcean switch which has now been added to a network. If we scroll down to where it says faceplate, you can see that I've configured this one as 4 push buttons. It's therefore giving me a 4 push button icon and 4 different options to choose from. Here I've automatically selected a scene for my own garage. You can also use the toggle option for EnOcean switches. However, you'll notice that the long press all off option is not available for EnOcean switches. Because the EnOcean switch does not have a plus or a minus button, it instead can be dimmed by just simply holding the button down. Remember that with this switch you are not dimming up and down, because there may be a setup or an option where you have the same luminaire different luminaires configured for the down and the up, potentially. So in some cases, pushing the same button will dim up or down, depending on the current dimming level of your luminaire. For example, if your luminaire is at 100% and you hold the button, it will dim down because it cannot go above 100%. So let's have a look at the different fascia plates. Here I've selected the faceplate. Depending on the fascia you have on your own EnOcean switch, you can then choose 4 push buttons, 2 rocker switches, a 2 push button, which is this one here, or 1 rocker switch. So it's the same physical switch, but you're configuring it in a different way. If we were to select this option here, 1 rocker switch, you would control the same luminaire, group or scene and simply fade it up and down. With the two push buttons, you're choosing two scenes or two groups or two luminaires independently. Again, in this case, if we were to assign a luminaire to option 1, the top, we would use that same button to dim it up and down. The last two options are two buttons and one rocker switch, meaning this one here. You could assign a luminaire, a group or a scene to this switch, a second scene or group luminaire to this one, and then use the up and down on this side to fade the scene or luminaire or group up and down. And the very last one, dimmer and temperature, uses the same double rocker physical switch, but instead you're using the left hand side to fade the luminaire up and down, and you're using the right hand side to change the Kelvin value. The final option for a switch is the CBU-ASD. Here we have a standard push button switch, a non-latching switch, and I've connected to the analog digital port of the CBU-ASD. Although these wires are currently blue and brown, please note they do not represent line or neutral. They could be any colour really. All you're doing is actually shorting the circuit on the plus and minus. There's no voltage going through. You probably find that when you first buy a Casambi-enabled it is not set up in the correct profile to be used as a push button, so that's what we're going to do first. At the top of the list here, I can see that the default for this this unit was last used with a 2-channel dimmer, so I'll select it and I'm going to change the profile. Somewhere in here should be an option that says push button. There it is, right at the bottom. I'll select push button, start to change the profile. That's updated OK. So now at the top of the nearby devices you can see that it's now updated to become a push button. I'll quickly update the firmware as it needs doing. So the firmware has now finished, so we'll go back. So you can now see that it's unpaired at version 26 and is configured as a push button. So let's now add it to our network. It's now changed to the Casambi network. And if we now go to the switches list, we now see the push button in the list. Select that. Again, the toggle option is there as with other switches. You can change the name, add an icon, etc. However, we first need to select what the push button is going to do. So there are many options here. Control a luminaire, control an element and group or scene. The reason why element and group are not highlighted is because I don't currently have any devices in my network which are using elements, and I have not created any groups. You can use it to control all luminaires, adjust the temperature of a tunable white luminaire, which I don't currently have installed, and you can cycle scenes and set scenes to active standby, and you can, if you wish, even use input from this button as if it was a presence sensor, meaning when somebody presses the button, it acts as if a sensor has just been triggered. And again, the last two options, you can use this to resume automation. That's something we'll talk about in a later video. For this example, we'll simply control a luminaire, and that's it. We've now assigned my RGB light to the push button. Simple as that. The final topic for switches is smart switching. Similar to the options available with the push button, you can find smart switching available with the CBU-ted devices and also the CBU-ASD devices. Simply open your settings, and it's the third option down, Smart Switch. The default on these devices is, especially on the TED, is dim and save. However, as you'll see, there are many more options. Similar to push button input, you can control scenes, cycle scenes, use active standby, and the present scenes, things like that. However, one extra mode that smart switching can do, which push buttons cannot do, is cycle through modes. The way this works is, if this was a latching switch, you would have to, on the wall, you would have to turn it off and then quickly back on again. So for example, if I was to cycle through scenes, let me choose some scenes. We'd currently cycle through green, red and blue, which might mean something like green, red, blue. So the smart switch option is designed for standard latching wall switches.